Hi there. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Ryan Nobles. And we begin with breaking news out of Los Angeles, where protests are continuing for a fourth day over the Trump administration's immigration policies, with the White House deploying the military to crack down on demonstrations in a situation that shows few signs of calming. You're looking right now at live pictures of one confrontation right now between demonstrators and police at a local intersection. Now, some of the protests have turned violent, with agitators setting fire to driverless cars and looting local businesses. Authorities are reporting that they've made at least 56 arrests. President Trump today calling those protesters insurrectionists, while suggesting that his border czar, Tom Homan, should consider arresting California Governor Gavin Newsom.
Gavin Newsom he's daring Tom Homan to come and arrest him. Should he do it? Do it if I were Tom. I think it's great. Gavin likes the publicity, but I think it would be a great thing. The people that are causing the problem are professional agitators. They're insurrectionists. They're bad people. They should be in jail.
Now, it was a bit hard to hear over the rotor wash of the Marine One helicopter, but it's possible the president also said, "I think he's great," referring to his border czar, Tom Homan. Still, Newsom responded on social media, tweeting that the president's remarks were, as he called it, an unmistakable step toward authoritarianism. Moments ago, at an event at the White House, the president was asked by reporters what crime Newsom has committed. He responded that Newsom's crime was that he ran for governor, which is obviously not a crime. Now, despite his previous threats to arrest anyone who interferes with his operations, Homan says he's not ready to arrest California's governor or Los Angeles' mayor.
When he asked the questions, that include Mayor Bass and Governor Newsom, I was clear, they haven't crossed the line, but they're not above the law either. If they commit a crime, they certainly will ask for prosecution. That's what was happening. I never threatened to arrest Governor Newsom.
Close to 300 National Guard members, meanwhile, are on the ground right now in Los Angeles after the president once again invoked emergency powers and ordered the deployment of 2,000 troops over the weekend without the state's consent. About 500 Marines are also ready to deploy, the president defending that decision yesterday.
Well, we're going to have troops everywhere. We're not going to let this happen to our country. We're not going to let our country be torn apart like it was under Biden and his auto pen.
And California's Attorney General today making good on his promise to challenge the president's deployment of the National Guard, suing the administration. It comes after Newsom accused the president of escalating tensions for his own political benefit.
But Donald Trump needs to pull back. He needs to stand down. Donald Trump is inflaming these conditions. This is Donald Trump's problem right now. He made this up. This is a manufactured crisis in order to get under the tent to start to stretch credulity.
NBC News correspondent David Noriega joins me from Los Angeles. Also with me is NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez. And let's start with you, David. What is the situation like on the ground right now in Los Angeles? And are officials taking any precautions ahead of tonight?
Yeah, Ryan, so the reason you see me looking over there is because actually just in the last couple of minutes, this small group of protesters arrived here on the street that leads towards the federal building where the National Guard troops have been stationed for the last day. It's a small group, as you can see, but they seem relatively fired up. They are kind of walking out into the intersection here. It's a fairly big intersection downtown of Alameda and Aliso streets. And they were just, there was a small group of protesters throwing plastic water bottles at some police vehicles that were trying to enter the street here towards the federal building. We're seeing the same thing here happening right now. We've got some protesters hitting the outside of this law enforcement van. A few different actually law enforcement SUVs pulling into the street right now. Some armored vehicles you're going to see drive by shortly as well. As you can see, you've got some PD, some LAPD as well with rubber rounds, rubber bullets pointed at the protesters, ordering them to move. This is as much action as we've seen today, Ryan, and it started literally in the last 5 to 10 minutes. So that here, let me explain to you a little bit spatially how it is that this works right now. Alan, if I could actually have you just pan very quickly over towards the National Guard troops, if you can see them, because down that block where you see these vehicles, these police vehicles coming in, That is the federal building right in front of the Metropolitan Detention Center where these National Guard troops are stationed. Over the course of the last hour or so, they've started coming out in larger numbers. As you can see, they have their riot shields out, their batons out, all of their riot gear is out. So they seem to be prepared for further confrontations with protesters. Right now, I will say the number of protesters is small, Ryan. It's nowhere near the numbers that we saw yesterday that led to those really striking images that you saw with the Waymos being set on fire, with people throwing, rocks and other projectiles at police. Look, this could go. This is just beginning, right? It's only 1 o'clock in LA. It's been a quiet morning. That seems to be starting to change at this moment, but really it depends on how many protesters decide to show up at this very intersection, the point where we are right now, and how confrontational they decide to become with the police, and how quick the police are to deploy those less lethal munitions, Ryan, those crowd control measures that, sort of led to the escalation that we saw yesterday between protesters and police. Ryan, back to you.
And President Trump has called this an insurrection. He's called it a rebellion. And it's probably important to keep in mind, too, that there have been different protests throughout the city, throughout the area, to varying degrees of violence, most of them being predominantly peaceful. How would you describe the situation? You're the one on the ground. What does it seem like to you?
I mean, Ryan, it's unrest. I've covered many protests in the United States throughout the years and in other countries. I've seen protests that have gotten a lot more violent, a lot more intense, a lot more, actual riots. I would not describe this as a riot. There's property damage. As often happens in protests like this, there's a relatively small group of protesters who, as a tactic, as a sort of conscious tactic, this is something that they do, that they engage in deliberately and intentionally. They do things like set fire to Waymos. They do things like throw projectiles at police vehicles, etc. Again, this is a small group of people who are engaged in property damage as part of much larger mobilizations that are largely peaceful, that do sometimes do things like block intersections, even after LAPD declares them unlawful assemblies. Yesterday, they blocked the 101. As we're seeing this group of protesters here today, attempting to block this intersection as well. Just blocks away from me, there is I was actually just there before I came here for this live hit, Ryan. There's a 100% entirely peaceful, organized, very polite protest put together by the SEIU, the Service Employees International Union. You had some pictures of that up on the screen just a minute ago. That's what you're seeing right there with these aerials. That is in Grand Park, 100% peaceful, 100% organized, keeping people to the park. Look, there's always a variety of different people employing different tactics. Look, this is unrest. Los Angeles has definitely seen much worse in the past. I do just want to show you, my cameraman just pointed out to me that some LAPD riot control units are moving towards this group of protesters at the intersection. They are carrying some specific types of less lethal munitions. They're rubber rounds. They're 40-millimeter rubber rounds. What they do is they skip them at the ground towards protesters, towards their feet, and then have them bounce up towards protesters as a way of dispersing the crowds. Obviously, the fact that they're showing up with them doesn't mean that they're going to use them. We'll have to see if that happens or not in the next few minutes. The last thing I'll point out to you, Ryan, before I toss it back to you, there's a very clear distinction here between the National Guard troops that are all the way back there in front of the federal building with DHS and other federal security forces and the local police department who are doing really the bulk of the crowd control work here. Yesterday, there were some direct confrontations between the National Guard troops and protesters. That is no longer the case, and that is because local law enforcement is keeping a pretty wide perimeter around the area where the troops are stationed and preventing any protesters from getting there, again, by forcibly repelling them with less lethal, rubber rounds, foam rounds. There was some tear gas yesterday. Have not seen any tear gas yet today, but that is sort of where things have been escalating to over the last 24, 48 hours, Ryan.
Yeah, and obviously this is an evolving situation, but I wonder if you can tell from the protesters that you've talked to, are they clued in? As we do, if something happens, please sure to flag it to us. But
I'll let you know.
Yeah. Do you find that they're clued into what's being said by the president and the governor? This back and forth, the threats to arrest the governor. Is that something that's has reached this level of the protest, and is it having an impact on their decision making?
I think some protesters who are, sort of the more engaged in the more sort of organized, the ones who belong to institutions, organizations like labor unions, those people are paying attention to that kind of talk. I think they do think of themselves and the organizations that they belong to as more, sort of chess pieces on this political board. They think about the optics of this. Other protesters, like the group that we're seeing here, Alan, I don't know if you can pan over there again just so that we can have a visual about what we're talking about. There are, with any protest like this, you have to think about the groups of people who are protesting as diverse, as a sort of diverse coalition. They're not always necessarily organized amongst themselves, but there are always smaller groups of protesters who are much more willing to be confrontational, to engage in things like property damage, and are willing to sort of instigate these kinds of encounters with law enforcement. I will note, though, at this point, we do seem to have a front line of what appear to be clergy members at the front of this particular group of protesters who are forming a line at the very front of this group between the protesters behind them and the police. So, look, there's really no end to the diversity of the protesters that you see. The point that I was getting at, Ryan, is that the protesters who I think are a little bit more raucous, more likely to get engaged in that kind of more confrontational behavior, the ones that I've spoken to, they don't tend to be particularly concerned with the sort of, higher level political optics of this. They are angry. A lot of them are involved in other causes. A lot of them are carrying, things like Palestinian flags and keffiyehs. They have some of the signage that has somewhat more, ice out of LA. They tend to hold more radical positions. Some of them describe themselves as anarchists, etc. These are the people who I think are sort of likely to, inflame things in these sorts of encounters, intentionally inflame things. I don't think they would back away from that assertion or from that characterization. And they are different, I will say, in this particular instance from you're seeing, they are different from the clergy who have lined up directly in front of them, in front of the police. They're different from the union members that you're seeing, 2 or 3 blocks away at Grand Park. We often see these different sort of elements of protest converge in the same place. Again, this is a pretty small group, Ryan. I'm not, we need aerials to really start estimating a crowd, but maybe 100 people roughly here at this intersection right now. It might grow over the course of the next few hours. That's really what's going to determine how, how heated things get here, Ryan.
And I also wonder too, David, you're talking about different law enforcement agencies that answer to different levels of authority. And in some cases, those levels of authority are in conflict, right? Those police officers that are standing behind you, their chain of command comes from the mayor's office, right? These National Guard troops got their marching orders from the White House. Are they able to work together, I guess, is the question, despite having perhaps maybe different messaging coming from their leadership?
It's a really good question, Ryan, and it's a really unusual situation that you have LAPD responding to the mayor. Yesterday you had California Highway Patrol responding to the governor, essentially protecting the federal building and the National Guard troops from keeping protesters from reaching them, even though at the higher levels between the president and the governor themselves, they are in conflicts. I will tell you, the conflict between the actual elected officials, the president and the governor, I think is a little bit more pointed, a little bit more clear. There is no conflict like that between the law enforcement and security forces that we're seeing here on the ground. We have DHS vehicles pulling into this street, being protected by LAPD officers who are the ones holding the line, preventing protesters from reaching the place where DHS and National Guard troops are stationed. So even though it's an unusual situation, even though the National Guard is here against the wishes of the governor, even though the National Guard is here, contravening the wishes of the governor and facing criticism from the mayor as well for their presence here, nevertheless, you see coordination on the ground between local police, LAPD, who are doing, again, the lion's share, the vast majority, I would say at this point, pretty much all of the crowd control work in preventing people from being able to reach the National Guard troops and the federal security for the federal agents that are, around the middle of this block here behind me, Ryan.
Okay, David, do us a favor. You guys, first of all, stay safe, but we're going to keep you connected to us and stand by. If something pops up, please flag it to us and let us know. We'll go to immediately. But let's turn to Gabe now at the White House, where he has some breaking news about the situation and the response from the federal government. Gabe, what can you tell us?
Hi there, Ryan. Well, this could be interpreted to be a significant escalation here, according to 2 defense officials telling our Pentagon team approximately 700 active duty troops, 700 Marines have just been mobilized to support the National Guard in Los Angeles County. That is up until, is temporary until more National Guard troops arrive. Now, this is significant, Ryan. Again, this would be 700 Marines, not just National Guard troops. President Trump was asked about this just a few minutes ago at a roundtable we had here at the White House. He was asked directly whether that would happen, and he said, quote, "We'll see what happens." Now, short time before that, I spoke with a White House official that said that no final decision had been made, but if those Marines are sent there, that they would be sent there to simply protect ICE agents that are already on the ground. Now, Ryan, as you know, this comes after over the weekend, the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said that it was possible that active duty Marines could be sent to the area from nearby Camp Pendleton. At that point, it was simply a threat. The president did not make any commitment one way or the other. But again, now the breaking news, we are learning that according to two defense officials, approximately 700 Marines have been mobilized to head to the area. Again, that is temporary until more National Guard troops arrive. We're waiting for any more updated word from the White House at what led to this. But it is an escalation as the administration monitors these protests and sees if they continue tonight and over the next couple of days, Ryan.
And Gabe, it seems that the White House is comfortable leaning into this situation. And we now know that they're willing to send Marines in to deal with this. How much further could they potentially escalate the federal government's involvement in Los Angeles?
Well, as one White House official told me earlier today, quote, "We are happy to have this fight." Not that they want to see violence on the ground in American cities, but that they view it as a fight that they want to have politically, because blue cities, they, in their view, are not doing enough to protect law and order. And they see this as a mandate that they were given by their voters to have this immigration crackdown continue really throughout the country. So certainly they are leaning into it. You just heard it from the president in his comments a few moments ago, leaning into that criticism of Governor Gavin Newsom, calling him incompetent. And significantly, Ryan, it was just several years ago, back in 2020, that the president made comments suggesting that he recognized that he needed authorization from a state's governor before he sent in the National Guard. This is, of course, the first time since the 1960s, 1965, the Civil Rights era, that a president has sent in a National Guard over the objection of that state's governor. However, this is something that President Trump, in a different form, has done before. Back in 2020 in Portland, Oregon, for example, it wasn't the National Guard, but he sent in federal agents in order to quell protests there. So this is something the administration is very comfortable with, as you said, leaning into this because they see it as a winning political issue, Ron.
All right, let's go back to David on the ground there in Los Angeles. And David, you're hearing this news just like we are, that Gabe's reporting that those Marines have been given the word to deploy. How do you think that will be received on the ground where you are to see this escalation, first the National Guard and now actually U.S. Marines on the ground there in Los Angeles?
Ryan, it's without question an escalation. What I can tell you is that yesterday, the presence of the National Guard troops here was a major factor in escalating the protests that we saw and the degree and the intensity of the confrontation between the protesters and law enforcement. You know, when they were allowing us access back there, I was there all morning yesterday, and protesters were very clearly very angry at the fact that the National Guard troops were here. And then it was local law enforcement efforts to move protesters away from that specific location. Multiple protests from different points of the city converged here, and that's what led LAPD and other local law enforcement agencies to push them away. That's what led to those confrontations with protesters. That was just on the presence, based on the presence of the National Guard, obviously federalized against the wishes of the governor. But escalating this to active duty Marines is a major escalation. Protesters here are not going to take kindly to that. Any of the protests, I described to you a sort of range of protesters, from people willing to engage in confrontational behavior to people who will only, march peacefully and politely. I think that entire range of protesters is not going to be happy about this. And just that news is likely to inflame tensions. And I will say, Ryan, for what it's worth, today compared to yesterday, things were much quieter, much more orderly today compared to what they were yesterday. So it's a little bit puzzling to me, just based on my perspective on the ground, why it would be necessary to send active duty Marines at this moment. There are no riots happening. nothing's on fire. Yesterday, there were, things that you might plausibly describe as riot behavior. There were things on fire. That is not the case today. So I'm not sure why, after things quieted down, after things calmed down substantially, again, just reporting what I'm seeing on the ground, I'm not sure why that is the moment that the decision is made to deploy Marines. I think it speaks to some of the things that we've been hearing from Gabe and Yamiche and other folks at the White House today, that this has a lot to do with the optics, it has a lot to do with the politics, and that is in some ways disconnected from the reality of what is actually happening on the ground here in Los Angeles. Ryan.
Okay, David, you continue to stand by. If there is any news, please flag it to our control room. Gabe Gutierrez, we appreciate your reporting from the White House. We're going to talk more about this now. On set with California Democratic Congresswoman Nanette Barragán. She represents a portion of Los Angeles County, including the city of Paramount. First, Congresswoman, just your reaction to this news that the White House has mobilized Marines to respond to the situation in Los Angeles. Do you think that's necessary?
Absolutely not. It's disturbing. And I think your person on the ground there makes a great point. What is the need for them? There is no need. There is peaceful protest happening downtown as we speak. Yes, there may be a very small group of people who have been more violent, throwing bottles. Those people should be arrested. We condemn any kind of violence. We continue to do that. But there is no need for the Marines. This is the president escalating a situation to try to make it as tense as possible. I think this is his step trying to get to martial law, trying to be the dictator that he wants to be. It's very dangerous. Our Marines are not trained to go in and to work with civilians and to do any kind of civilian control. So it's disturbing that they're bringing them in. It's wrong. I think it's an abuse of power. But it also goes to why the president is doing this. The president wants to distract and take away from what's happening in Washington. We know he's about to take health care away from millions of people. His bill is in trouble. The economy is tanking. Prices are going up. This is his way of saying, let's go talk about the issue that always brings me back home, and that is immigration. And coming after California and doing it there is what he's doing because, of course, this feud he has with the governor. The people are protesting. They're protesting against the mass deportations. They want the National Guard out. They want ICE out. And I guarantee you, if they pulled out and they were out, these protests would end because this is about the president causing this chaos. It's about the president wanting this, and we can't allow protesters to give in and take that bait.
So the chances of ICE, in particular, pulling out at this particular point in time seems pretty unlikely. You told other networks that you have been told to get ready for 30 days of ICE enforcement with the potential of 2,000 troops. I mean, what do you think the next month could look like in Los Angeles, and how are you preparing your constituents for that?
Well, we are hearing on the ground in different parts of Los Angeles that they're seeing ICE mobilize, have staging areas. So it could be that they're about to do a larger enforcement throughout different parts of L.A. County. They did say get ready for 30 days of enforcement, and that looks like what we're looking at right now just by seeing the mobilization of National Guard, of course, the Marines now. My hope is that we can get a court to stop it because I think that this is an abuse of the president and his powers. This is a manufactured crisis, as we definitely have heard, but it's putting people in danger. And constituents are concerned. They're worried. People don't want to go to school. People don't want to go to work. And I just want to reiterate, this is a very small part of Los Angeles, of the images that we're seeing. There's like 99% of Los Angeles. People don't even know what's going on. They're going about their daily lives. There is nothing out of control there. And local law enforcement has said, we don't need the help. We don't need it. We have this under control. If they just pull out and they leave, we can get this under control. And let's remember, Friday and Saturday, when this all started, it didn't take the National Guard. It didn't take the Marines to get it under control. The LAPD got it under control. The sheriffs had it under control. This is exactly what the president wanted. Send in the National Guard, raise tensions, cause more people to want to, do violent things. And he's getting what he wants. This guy is a showman. He knows what he's doing. We've got to reject it.
But you can see there has been some violence, right? We've seen the driverless cars that have been set fire to. We've seen the water bottles thrown at police officers. And it did appear at one point that this was getting worse, that there was an escalation in those tensions. You still believe that those tensions can be held under control with just the efforts of the LAPD and not any additional support?
Absolutely, because I think the people are doing that because of their outrage on the mass deportations and the presence of the National Guard, as we heard your reporter on the ground say. But there are people who are just looking for trouble. And even your reporter said there's anarchists there. Right. And let's, distinguish between the people that are really there to protest the cause versus people just looking for trouble and violence. And those people, they should be arrested. This is what the president wants. And we can't let them do that because I think that's the step the president's trying to get to, declaring martial law. So
what would you say to someone that wants to go there and protest peacefully without contributing to potential violence? What would your recommendation? Do you have a problem with them confronting ICE officers, blocking intersections? Where does that stop? Where does it become illegal and something that needs to be enforced?
Well, we saw today what can happen when you go and peacefully protest. There's thousands of people right now at Grand Park doing just that. So, look, people are going to go. If they're going to get in the way, they could expect to be charged. They could expect to be arrested. But what I say is if you're going to have civil disobedience, make it sure it's nonviolent, because violence gets us nowhere. We know it's prevailed in the past during different movements, and we are standing strong with our brothers and sisters in Los Angeles to say we're going to all stand together against these mass deportations, and that's the protesters seeing. Again, any violence, we totally condemn it. Those people should be arrested.
What about blocking an intersection? Where does that fall on the spectrum? Is that appropriate? I mean, that's illegal, right?
It is, and I think that's a form of civil disobedience. When you think about John Lewis crossing Selma and getting beaten there, so I think it's a line where you decide whether you're going to do it or not. It's a non-violent form of protesting. Now, again, people need to make decisions for themselves. I'm not sure how effective that is. I'm not sure that's something that I would be doing. But, this is a situation where the president is taking steps to make it out of control. And we're seeing more and more of that with more and more people who are angry. Marines, we'll have to see what's going to happen with the response there. But it's pretty outrageous to me to hear that we're sending in troops to do crowd control or whatever they're going to go do there against the very own people, in our communities where they come from.
All right, I want to talk to you now about the back and forth between the president and your governor. I want to play what Tom Homan said on MSNBC earlier today. Take a listen.
Is everyone that has been arrested by ICE agents have a criminal record like those you've described?
Absolutely not. And I said from day one, January 20th, we will prioritize public safety threats and national security threats. However, we will enforce law. If ICE is there arresting that bad guy and other aliens are there, we're going to arrest them. That's what sanctuary cities get.
So this seems to be the basis of Donald Trump's complaints about Gavin Newsom, this moniker of a sanctuary city or a sanctuary state. And this idea that Newsom has been critical that they're going overboard, right? It's one thing to stick to this mission of deporting people who have committed crimes, but other people are getting caught up in it. Is that a distinction without a difference in your mind? And how is ICE going overboard in a way that kind of goes beyond what their authority is?
Well, we know that this president said he was going after criminals. People who voted for him, Latinos that voted for him, said, well, it's not going to be me because I'm not a criminal, right? We know that there's no way he can do the mass deportations he talked about without going and doing indiscriminate racial profiling, which is what's happening, right? They're picking up U.S. Marshals thinking that they're folks they got to deport. They're picking up women who've just given birth, waiting outside of hospitals or going to schools. It is crossing the line. They are not doing targeted enforcement of violent criminal offenders. If that were happening, I don't think you would have the objection because nobody objects to that. But what they're doing is they're going into communities. They're just rounding people up, U.S. citizens included. We know they've also are trampling on due process. And that is a concern that people have. People are scared and they're afraid. So you're seeing the response of ICE crossing the line. I mean, look, they're saying they're willing to arrest the governor. Give me a break, right? They're arresting members of Congress. They won't even let members of Congress go in to do the oversight, which is written into law. So you have got an administration who is not following law and order, but who is defying the law, who's defied the Supreme Court. We've seen that.
And you've already said that you believe that the Trump administration is marching toward martial law. If they were to arrest the governor, and obviously we're getting mixed signals from the White House on that, how would you view that? What step and what could Democrats do if that were to happen?
Well, I think that would cause an outrage across the country. I don't think this is. you're talking about something that has never been done before. You're talking about to the point where this president, is doing everything possible to be a dictator. That would be another step in that direction. Everybody across the country, regardless if you're a Democrat or a Republican, should be condemning that kind of conduct. And unfortunately, my friends on the Hill right now are too afraid to speak up or stand up to this president. And again, it's unbelievable to watch. But we need the courts to also step in and to make sure they get things under control and put them in check. That's really what's necessary. Okay, Congresswoman Nanette Barragán, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. Thank you. We're now going to dive into the legal aspect of all of these decisions being made by the White House. Joining me now is Robert Tsai. He's an expert in constitutional law and a law professor at Boston University, a school of law. First, Professor, just your reaction to the president's decision to deploy Marines to respond to a domestic incident. Is he able to do this under the law?
Well, it depends on what the mission is. We do have a very strong tradition in this country reflected in federal law that boots on the ground is a threat to liberty. And federal law generally prohibits the military from engaging in domestic law enforcement activities. So, so far, the boots on the ground are presumably doing the same function as the federalized National Guard, which, according to his order, is to protect the mission of the ICE agents and other federal employees and activities. So if that's what they're there to do, then that'll be fine. Yeah. But as we know, and as you've been talking about, there is enormous risk that the more boots on the ground we have, the more confusion we might have, as well as incredible legal complexity about who's in charge and what rules are to be followed. And I should say mobilized, not deployed, and those are probably very important distinctions at this point of this conversation. I mean, when it comes to the rules of engagement, I mean, what does the Constitution say about what National Guard members can do and cannot do while they're in Los Angeles, especially under the current order that they've been given by the White House? Well, the federalized members of the National Guard are bound by the same legal rules and constitutional principles as other military officers. So, according to the President's order, they're there to protect the federal buildings, courthouses, ICE agents, to help them do their work. And so now if they venture beyond that, because rocks or bottles are thrown at them, then we start to get into a grayer area, right? At what point are they reasonably taking steps to safeguard those federal functions and those missions? And at what point have they gone way beyond that to engage in the prohibited activities? And so one thing to keep in mind here, of course, is that the law that President Trump has so far invoked is a more limited law. It's not the Insurrection Act, which he may still invoke. We hope he does not do that because there are conditions on the ground that seem deeply contested. We've got state officials, local officials saying there's no need for that and rejecting that form of assistance just yet. So that's kind of the explain to us why that would be problematic if he took that step and why that would be of concern. Well, the Insurrection Act is the main exception to this tradition that boots on the ground are a threat to liberty. And so if he were to try to invoke the Insurrection Act, he would be, in a sense, saying, I think there is a broad-based insurrection against the functions of government, preventing the federal government from doing anything, and that I'm going to need to take this extraordinary step, even over the objections of people on the ground, to bring federal troops in and restore order. We've done that very rarely in this country because of the chaos that could ensue. It's unclear what would happen if he took that step at the moment. Yeah. And so we know that California's Attorney General is filing suit, citing the 10th Amendment. Do you think he has a strong case? And is part of the issue here the expediency in which this could be settled in the courts? Yeah, courts in general don't act very quickly. There is a provision that it sounds like Governor Newsom is mentioning and probably will have in their papers, which is the particular law that President Trump has invoked at the moment does have language saying that the president's order shall be essentially issued through the state's governors. And so Governor Newsom is arguing that that is a kind of substantive procedural hurdle that the president has not overcome. He's not consulted with him. He's kind of doing over his objection. But the question that court will have to answer is whether that is really the kind of thing that will prevent a president from acting on an emergency that is perceived, or whether this is the kind of thing that can be sort of loosely complied with.
And then, of course, there's this back and forth between the administration, the mayor, and the governor about potentially the governor or the mayor being arrested. This is obviously without precedent. What could this lead to if it actually got to that step?
Well, the way I see that language is it's part of a kind of dangerously overheated political rhetoric. And it's not matching up with the legal justifications that we're seeing in the legal briefs. And when you see that sort of mismatch, what you really do worry about is regular people are being misled about what is happening. You start to worry about the president's motives. And then you do worry about a kind of escalation in which it's unclear whether there are real conditions on the ground that require a massive show of force, or whether that's going to do any good.
Yeah, and to your point, that could lead to people getting even more upset. So if the goal here is to calm tensions, if the mayor is taken away in handcuffs, if the governor's taken away in handcuffs, that could just make protesters even more angry.
100%. One of the things that we've seen in presidents of the past that have been prized for sort of cool-headed action is that they've tried to be much more modern, incremental, and worry about things like the right to free speech, both to protest and to counter-protest, and not merely, taking a situation, exploiting it for sort of maximal political gain. And so one of the things that is worrisome is that the voters have put back into office a person who is a populist autocrat. And so you worry about a tendency to want to exploit these situations rather than bring things to a cooler point.
Okay, Professor Tsai, thank you for making that as plain-spoken as possible, given these complex times. We appreciate it, sir.
Always a pleasure.
All right. We'll have much more news and politics still ahead. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. We are learning more about the Trump administration's latest move to mobilize Marines to support the National Guard members in Los Angeles. According to two defense officials, the Marines and California National Guard have been authorized to operate under three specific rules of force: self-defense, defense of federal property, and the defense of federal personnel. We're now going to go back to David Noriega, who is on the ground with us in Los Angeles. He has an update on the situation there. David, what can you tell us?
Well, Ryan, the sort of standoff that I was showing to you earlier is basically gradually escalating. The LAPD, which you see right over here, they have issued a dispersal order to the people that, are standing around me right now. There's a pretty diverse crowd here. We have some young folks, some people carrying Mexican flags. And then here, as you can see right behind me, is a line of clergy who have been pretty consistently trying to create a sort of barrier between the police and the protesters. But do you mind if I talk to you very, very quickly? We're live on NBC News right now on Meet the Press Now.
Yeah. Tell me what your name is? My name is Rabbi Susan Goldberg.
Okay. And why are you here today?
Well, we're here because we're clergy. We represent ancient faiths that tell us that we have to be in the world with deep compassion and deep love. And what's happened in our city does not represent the deepest values of our tradition. And all people of conscience across Los Angeles are just horrified. This morning, I listened to families kids describe seeing their parents in the raid on Friday. Not only did they see their parents handcuffed, they saw their parents shackled with chains on their wrists and their ankles. These were folks, all they did was go to work that day. The false narrative that this is about hardened criminals is really not true. Because as clergies, we've also been in the courts watching as people are following the laws, showing up for their court dates, and then being arrested. This is about dehumanization. This is about getting quotas. I think that Trump has some sort of quotas, but these are not numbers. These are human beings.
Rabbi, have you heard about the fact that we have some new reporting saying that Donald Trump is planning to send active duty Marines to Los Angeles as of just recently? Have you heard that? Do you have a reaction to that?
Another reporter just mentioned that to me. It was the first time I heard that. I mean, we are so saddened by that. Over and over again, our really capable city and state leadership has said we are fine and we are not looking for the help. There have been pockets of violent protests, which we do not want. Okay. It's part of why we are here, to try and create a nonviolent, peaceful protest. But the truth is, it's been pockets. And I have been with groups of thousands of people over the last few days who are overwhelmingly responding nonviolently, but from a place of deep upset and concern, because what is happening is completely unacceptable. Okay. If we are just to turn away now, what's next? I mean, they're literally rounding up people in a donut shop was one of the locations.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. I appreciate it. Well, Ryan, I'm going to toss it back to you briefly, but as you can tell, things are ebbing and flowing. It gets quiet, it gets calm, and then from one moment to the next, police issue a dispersal order. People refuse to move. I'm going to be here for the rest of the day. I'll let you know if things heat up again. Ryan.
Okay, David Noriega, you and your crew continue to stay safe. Thank you for that update. We're going to talk now about this with our panel. Michael Chanel, she's a congressional reporter at The Hill. Chuck Rocha is a Democratic strategist and the co-host of the Latino Vote podcast. And Rob Bluey, the president and executive editor of the Daily Signal. So, Michael, let's talk about this ongoing fight between President Trump and California, both with Governor Newsom and Mayor Bass there. What are the optics, or how do the optics of this, how do they play? And is it your sense that President Trump feels like he's got nothing to lose here, just to go all in?
It seems like a fight that President Trump relishes. It sort of hits his trifecta of areas that he loves to tackle: immigration, law and order, and California Democrats. And quite honestly, you have a little sprinkle of bonus there, the fact that Gavin Newsom is at the center of this. Those are fights that Donald Trump likes to take on, that he is leaning into right now. And it's distracting from a lot of things that are going on right here. Something that we cover very closely up on Capitol Hill, the big, beautiful bill. President Trump was just at the White House and said that it's possible that they don't get this done by that self-imposed July 4th deadline. That's something that party leaders have really been running towards and been underscoring that they are going to meet. That would be big news if we weren't watching Los Angeles so closely. So I think that both things can be true at the same time, that this is a fight that President Trump enjoys because it hits all of those touch points, and also it's distracting from other touchy subjects back home.
I mean, Rob, on the scale of protests, and, over the past 10 years or so that I've been a national correspondent, I've covered a lot of protests. And on the scale of protests, this is not to say there hasn't been violence, cars have been burned, but this does not seem that it is the massive threat that we've seen other protests. Why jump to the point of bringing Marines there so quickly?
Well, Ryan, I think there's a couple of things. First of all, we see this building. I mean, there's a lot of people on the left who are talking about No King's Day coming up on June 14th as a counter to President Trump's birthday and the big parade happening here in Washington, D.C. So I think there's probably concern that this could spread to other cities across the country, as they have talked about. So that's the number one thing. And I think, secondly, on the Marines' point specifically, they don't want this to get out of control like it did in 2020. I think there are regrets from the Trump administration that they didn't do more back then when they saw riots in numerous cities, and so they want to send a message to L.A. right now. And if Marines are there and they can stay within their confines of what they're engaged to do, I think that that's appropriate.
Chuck, is that appropriate?
I don't think it's appropriate. I think this is exactly what Donald Trump wants. Like, we've all covered him. We all act like this is some new thing. This is exactly the fight he wants to have. And to Michael's point, it hits every one of them. And I give you the bonus of Los Angeles and movie stars. I wouldn't be surprised if he brings jet airplanes and helicopters. He wants us talking about this every day because it's immigration. It's people standing on burnt cars waving Mexican flags. Like, the real folks out there that are my friends, that are in the streets, that are doing peaceful protests about bringing light to an immigration system that's been broken. This ain't the ones burning the cars. This also gives people who do not have their best will at hand to come there to cause trouble and to stir up messes to where this thing is not going to end well, and this is exactly what Donald Trump wants.
To your point, though, Chuck, and the Congresswoman made a similar point, that, and I think most people would agree, that the overwhelming number of protesters are not the ones burning the cars. But yet, I think those same protesters understand that brings that element to a situation like this. Is there some calculation that these protesters need to make about, if you decide to engage like this, there are going to be bad actors that are going to come in and kind of mess the message up that you're trying to sell?
Absolutely. And I've been doing this a long time. I've been at many protests. We were in the groom room a while ago, and I was explaining what a rubber bullet feels like when you get shot with one, because I've been shot with one. There are well-intentioned folks there, but you have to separate them against other troublemakers on our side who just care about being on camera, because now it's a full-time job on Instagram and on Substack to have a video camera on you talking about how you're fighting back, and you don't vote. You don't care about the community. You just care about clicks and being on social media.
Right. And Donald Trump's taking advantage of that, isn't he?
Well, certainly. And if you go back and you look at some of the issues that animated voters in the 2024 election, clearly immigration was one of them. You look at the polls that are even out, a majority of Americans support deportations and some of the policies that this administration is pursuing. And so then if you have bad actors who are disrupting and causing fear and concern in cities, a major city like Los Angeles, Ryan, I think absolutely the Trump administration is going to come in there and try to set an example.
All right, Michael, let's play a little bit of what Speaker Mike Johnson had to say yesterday. Take a listen to this.
Could we really see active duty Marines on the streets of Los Angeles?
You know, one of our core principles is maintaining peace through strength. We do that on foreign affairs and domestic affairs as well. I don't think that's heavy-handed. I think that's an important signal.
You don't think sending the Marines into the streets of an American city is heavy-handed?
We have to be prepared to do what is necessary, and I think the notice that might happen might have the deterrent effect.
Michael, I find it's interesting. You and I have often heard Mike Johnson brag about the fact that brag's not a right word. He makes sure we know that he's a constitutional law expert. He talks about his love for the Constitution, not wanting to burn the Constitution. The idea that he would kind of so flippantly talk about bringing federal resources, military resources in to deal with a domestic problem. How does he make that argument that that's a good use of Pentagon resources?
Well, I think in a way it's that President Trump is leaning towards this. The administration is talking more about the Insurrection Act. We're seeing federal troops, National Guard be sent to Los Angeles. This is a very precarious moment for Republicans in Washington right now. I'm going to go back to that big, beautiful bill. We eat, sleep, and breathe it. That is right now in the final stretch. Donald Trump has been a very big part of muscling that bill through the House, and he's going to be a big part of muscling it through the Senate. Johnson doesn't want to mess up that equilibrium right now of having Donald Trump on his side. So we're going to see him do acrobatics, however it must be, to rationalize what President Trump is saying. Though I think something interesting he said there, he said that the talk about it may be a deterrent. It kind of reminds me of the tariffs talk. If we talk about doing something, it may force people to act a different way, and then we don't have to do it. I think that that could be maybe a key into what Republicans are looking at right now. But again, to get back to your question, Mike Johnson is going to say what he has to say to defend Donald Trump, because right now he just needs to get that bill through Congress, and he sure needs Donald Trump's help.
And Rob, what would you say to Michael's point that perhaps this might be a distraction because the bill is having a difficult time getting through the Senate? And we should also point out that this bill is kind of the foundation of the funding that's going to go toward this mass deportation program. Shouldn't they be putting their focus there?
Absolutely it is. And they need to get this across the finish line. I mean, Tom Homan has been talking about since January 20th, that this bill includes the resources that they need to carry out the deportations. It has the resources for ICE. It has the remittances, which the Mexican president was talking about. So there's a whole number of things at stake. Ryan, I might slightly disagree, though. The Senate is moving forward. I think they're still on the path to July 4th. Yes, there are a few senators who are trying to negotiate things, but at the end of the day, do you really see them bucking Donald Trump? I don't.
Yeah. So there's a name we haven't mentioned yet in this panel, which you guys are probably all surprised by, and that's Elon Musk. Remember, like 24 hours ago, that was a story that none of us could stop talking about. Chuck, could this be part of the plan for Donald Trump? Is it to get Elon Musk off the front page and out of these panel discussions?
Look, I shake my head because nothing frustrates me as much as this president, because he's good at what he does when it comes to this. Distract, look over here, and it works. And he didn't want to talk about Donald Trump, talk about Elon Musk, because Elon Musk was going after this big, beautiful bill because they were having a fight. We ain't talked about any of that. And as a strategist looking towards the midterms and using the big, beautiful bill as bait to go against Republicans and make TV ads, I worry about Elon Musk money that was going to be spent in the midterms to protect these folks. And now I'm thinking, I don't have to worry about that no more.
Yeah. And I would just add one more thing. It's not only the distraction from not talking about Elon Musk, but Elon's now going back into Trump's corner. We're seeing him retweet things having to do with Los Angeles in favor of the president and what the administration is doing. So Musk is slowly and maybe quietly getting back into the president's corner. It seems like that's exactly how he wants it to go.
It may never be the same, guys. It may never be the same, no matter how much
we always break up. I'm just letting folks know. We always break up. It always ends.
Rob Louis still saying July 4th for the big, beautiful bill. We're going to hold him to that. All right, Michael, Chuck, Rob, thank you all for being here. After the break, can a 33-year-old Democratic socialist backed by AOC pull off an upset in the Democratic primary for New York mayor? Assemblyman Zohran Mamdani joins me with his view of the Democratic Party and how he would run America's largest city in the Trump era. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. We are following a number of key primary races happening this month, including in New York City, where former Governor Andrew Cuomo is attempting to make a political comeback in the city's Democratic mayoral primary. But he's facing a crowded field. His chief rival may be 33-year-old Queens Assemblyman Zohran Mamdani. He's a self-described socialist who's quickly made a name for himself in the race with a social media presence and the backing of progressive Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Now, making matters even more interesting, voters will be using the city's ranked choice voting system, where they can rank as many as 5 candidates in order of preference. If their top choices are eliminated, their votes can then be transferred toward the candidate ranked lower on their ballots. That's if it's not 50% on the first vote. Joining me now is New York State Assemblyman and New York City mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani. Assemblyman, thanks so much for being here. First, I want to start with the scenes out of Southern California over the weekend and into today. We now have this news that the president has mobilized Marines to be on the ground there. This after ICE raids in Los Angeles County. This is something that could easily happen in New York City. How would you be handling this situation if you were the mayor?
I would be calling it what it is, which is authoritarianism. This is yet another example of Donald Trump seeking to rip the fabric up of our cities and our countries, of attacking immigrants across this nation, as well as the very notion that so many of us Americans hold dear when we think about our Constitution. And we need to have a mayor that can look authoritarianism in the eye and not see a reflection of himself. And as the first immigrant mayor of this city in generations, I will do exactly that. I will stand up for the people of this city and make it clear to Donald Trump that he will find no collaborator here that he has found in Eric Adams.
So what should New York City be doing right now?
I think right now what we need to do is continue to follow the example of leaders across the country, including one that I'm so proud to have been endorsed by, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, in actually fighting for the things that we believe in and making it clear that in deploying the National Guard, Donald Trump is not only reversing the clear precedent where governors ask that of the president as opposed to the president imposing that upon a governor, but also that Democrats finally stand up and make it clear that this is not something that has any consent of anyone beyond the White House in Washington, D.C.
You have in the past called for abolishing ICE. As mayor, would you try to block the agency from conducting any actions in New York City? And how could you even make that possible?
Well, I think you can just look at the example of ICE raids that are happening here in New York City, because while we are not seeing the scale of deployment that we've seen in Los Angeles, we still are seeing New Yorkers being disappeared and detained, whether from their apartment building lobby or whether they're going for a routine immigration check-in at Federal Plaza. And too often under Eric Adams, we've seen NYPD units like the Strategic Response Group be deployed to assist in those kinds of arrests as they then arrest individuals like pastors who are just observing this clear attack on immigrants across this city.
But let's say you're the mayor and you do pull back from that cooperation that's happening right now with the federal government. Are you worried about retribution from the Trump administration?
I think what we're seeing right now is that retribution exists no matter how you respond to the Trump administration. Eric Adams is collaborating at almost every juncture he can find with this administration, and still New Yorkers are being detained, and still they're taking $80 million from our municipal budget, and still they attack the fabric of our city. So clearly, surrender has not won us much. It's actually time to fight back, and we've seen the most successful examples of fighting back against Donald Trump in those that are willing to do so. And we don't have to look so far, even in the Mexican president, Claudia Sheinbaum, who's exhibited that through strength, we can actually win back the city that we love.
We heard a line from you at your recent debate. You said that you would be President Trump's worst nightmare. Tell me what that looks like in practice.
You know, I'm a Muslim progressive immigrant who actually fights for the things that I believe in. And Donald Trump is used to career politicians who he can simply influence through the fact that they all have the same donors. And we know that when it comes to Andrew Cuomo, so many of the people bankrolling his super PAC are the ones who put Donald Trump back in the White House. If Donald Trump wants to call me through my donors, he can call the more than 20,000 people who have ensured that we've broken fundraising records as we've stormed into second place.
Governor Cuomo has countered your attacks by saying that he has a lot more experience than you have as a former governor, a former HUD secretary. How do you respond to his attacks that you just aren't ready to be mayor of New York City?
You know, I think this is a moment where New Yorkers have to ask themselves what kind of experience matters. If they want the experience of a governor who had to resign in disgrace, the experience of a governor who gave Elon Musk $1 billion in tax breaks, the experience of a governor who cut Medicaid and stole hundreds of millions of dollars from the MTA, then Andrew Cuomo should be their choice. But if they want the experience of someone who actually stands up and fights for working class New Yorkers, who's won $450 million in debt relief for working class taxi drivers, and who's built a movement over the course of this campaign that has taken us from 1% to being within single digits of Andrew Cuomo, then I am the candidate for that.
Now, you have proposed creating a Department of Community Safety, as you've called it. You say it would address homelessness, mental illness, violence in the subway system, things along those lines. These are traditionally responsibilities of the police department. What would you say to people that would describe this as defunding the NYPD?
I would first make it clear to them that I'm going to sustain the headcount of the NYPD, and I would ask them to speak to police officers themselves, because that's how we crafted this plan. It was in response to the fact that so many officers joined the force to take on serious crimes, and yet what they're finding is they're being asked to do the work of social workers and mental health professionals. I mean, the NYPD is responding to hundreds of thousands of mental health calls every single year, and that reliance on them to respond to almost each and every failure of the social safety net is one that is preventing them from tackling serious crimes. And that's part of the reason why 65% of those crimes from the first quarter of this year are unresolved. We want the police to be able to do their jobs, and we want to hire the mental health professionals and social workers that can actually deliver that public safety and follow on the examples of elsewhere in the country where this has already been proven successful.
We have political junkies that watch this show, so I'm sure that many understand New York has a unique situation in which you can run on more than one party line. Would you accept a run for mayor as the candidate of the Working Families Party if you are unsuccessful in the Democratic primary?
My only focus is on June 24th, and I'm confident, frankly, in our ability to win that primary. And I would say that Andrew Cuomo is nervous. It's why he's already started to create another party line that he can run on in November, because he knows that we are in.
Well, to that point, though, if you're worried that that's what Andrew Cuomo is doing, isn't that something you should have as a backup? Yes or no? Will you be a candidate in November, regardless of what happens this month?
I will be a candidate on the Democratic line. I'll tell you that.
All right. Seems like you're leaving that door open, but we appreciate you so much for being here. Thank you so much, and good luck with the rest of your campaign. Assemblyman Zohran Mamdani, we appreciate him being here, and thank you for watching. We'll be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. The news continues with Hallie Jackson right now.